to the 4 o'clock hour and today's technical workshop around integrating ArcGIS with other business systems. My name is Sam Libby. I've been working here at Esri for many years in our professional services division, so I work with our customers in the field, building solutions and systems that implement all kinds of ArcGIS technology. And of course, we also work with other business systems quite a lot, so I've been working in that space for many years as well.
Hey everyone, this is Jhonatan Garrido-Lecca, and I am a lead solutions engineer for the commercial sector, also working with customers that are dealing with integrations.
This is our third time giving this session over the past year and a half. We tried to evolve it every time, so I just want to mention I'm really keen to get your feedback on the subject matter and contents and make sure we're hitting the right mark. So please do let us know that you're interested in this topic and want to see other content as well. We're happy to hear it. We have, of course, feedback in the app, but you're also welcome to come up after the session and talk to us or at any time. We're going to start just with this kind of overview of today's modern ArcGIS system. We've been using this representation for a little while now, and we are focused today on what it means to be a well-architected system that is integrated. There's many other things you can talk about that define a good system, but being integrated, what does that really mean? Across, of course, workflows, apps, down through data and infrastructure, there are many different definitions of that. And when we use the word integration, I think it's important to provide our definition for today. The way I think about this is that to be integrated means to combine something, a technology or ArcGIS, with something else to make a whole. And that's a very generic definition because it means a lot of things to different people. So one example would be combining two things to make a whole workflow succeed, or building a whole application that combines multiple parts, or a whole system. There are many different levels to this definition. So something plus something else to make something else is that generic for a reason, because integration means that many different things. There are many forms of integration. You can look at integrating certain technologies or IT services, or things like identity providers, or a certain database, or a certain methodology into your system. Integration is often used to mean a project structure. This is the integration phase of our project. But one other key form is what we call business systems integration, which means really connecting two business systems together to achieve that whole, whatever it is. And that can mean two ArcGIS systems. You may do that with your own ArcGIS Enterprise and online systems or different organizations. But today we're focused on how we integrate ArcGIS with other business systems. And that term is quite flexible as well. What do we mean by business systems? Well, that is a system that does something in an organization that achieves a business objective. Again, a very generic definition because it means many things to different people. There are some general purpose forms of that are more focused on kind of capabilities like a business intelligence system or a IT service management system. They may do many things for you. They may be defined differently for organizations of different sizes, but those are business systems that achieve that objective. And there are also a variety of other industry-specific systems, you can see examples of these on the right, that fulfill a certain common business objective that's common across a category or set of industry organizations, or a common set of customer types or user types for whoever you work with. And both of these things, I think, are useful ways to see familiar terms that might help you think of the business systems that you use in your organization today. Other examples of this might be a vegetation management system, or a network information management system, or even imagery management for an imagery provider or for analysis could fall into some of these categories. One way that we think about integrating ArcGIS with other business systems is things that we provide out of the box at the integration level or that our partners provide. So Esri provides a variety of technology patterns and tools to integrate other systems, things like our support for the Microsoft Fabric ecosystem or M365 in general, or the work we do around Autodesk are good examples of that. We build capabilities into a variety of ArcGIS products that let us work with those systems to achieve certain workflows or outcomes. We also have a partner community that builds integrations that help you work with their systems or other business systems to achieve those goals. So things like working with a Maximo indoor asset management system supported by IBM, and the work they're doing there is an example of a partner we work with that provides that level of integration. So one way to look at that is these kind of system-to-system integrations that we provide right now. I want to add to that by introducing also technology integrations, technology platform integrations. The distinction between this graphic and the previous graphic is really that these describe technologies that are often used to construct business systems, whereas these represent the systems themselves. It's kind of a semantic difference, but I think it's important because the way that we connect to and integrate with technologies like AWS or Microsoft Azure and Fabric or Snowflake or IBM can take a lot of different forms, and there are often many different pathways to do so. And I'll provide more examples of each of those here in a minute. But we do think about it differently to talk about how we connect to a technology platform differently than a business system, because there are certain things that need to be considered in that discussion. There's a few high-level patterns that we think are relevant to talk about as we think about these integrations. I'll talk through 5 of these. First is the idea of workflow-based integration. This is where a user might be completing a workflow like a field data collection pattern, and they might be moving between different applications to complete different parts of that workflow. Maybe over the course of the day, they start off in a dashboard in the office, they get their assignments, they move to a certain mobile app in the field, maybe it's Field Maps or maybe it's Salesforce Field Service, for example. And then they come back later on and do some QA in a GIS-based system. I think that's a really important and valid integration pattern. You're moving between different apps at different times of the workflow. You're working in 2 different systems, but it's achieving the business goal of that field data capture, quality assurance, and review. You might also build a single focused business application where actually that app talks to both systems at the same time. So this might be a map-centric app, or maybe it's a more data-centric app with a few map components, and it makes requests to both your ArcGIS-based system and the other business system from that same interface. 2 other patterns that are kind of inverse of each other would be bringing data or capabilities from a different business system into ArcGIS, and of course the opposite, providing ArcGIS capabilities to your other business system. This is what we think of on the left side as a geocentric system. Maybe we're bringing in some data from a different database or system that is important for a certain GIS workflow. Whereas the right example is a more geo-enabled system, where you might have an existing pattern, for example, for permit submissions, and you have one step where you need a very specific ArcGIS capability or data set. You can bring just that data capability in and keep the center of kind of focus and user experience and workflow on that other business system. These are all valid examples. And the last, and this is something that we'll show in more detail in Jhonatan's demos, is the idea of using different business systems by combining their data together into one central data platform. I talk about these as modern data platforms now that kind of mix data lakes, data warehouses together, and building apps, analytical workflows, or data engineering flows that operate in that centralized environment. I think all 5 of these are individually different from each other and are a good way to look at integrations that cover a lot of our common patterns. As we think about how to approach some of those areas, some of the things that I like to talk about in my work with our customers in the field is some best practices of how to approach the design process. I do a lot of work around architecture and design, so I always think of things through the lens of design. I ask people to try to start with a narrative of what they want to integrate. We often get kind of tied around and confused around integrations when we're not being specific. And I think trying to say what we're trying to do and really actually write out the sentence that describes it is a really important step. When users submit a report in the field, the data needs to be sent to this system to be validated through this third-party service and show up in this dashboard that is important to our stakeholder. Rather than saying I need to integrate, field data collection with this dashboard. It's a small difference, but I think the act of writing it down and being really clear about that can help to drive out the details that you either know or don't know. And basically, until you can clearly describe the steps in the flow, I think you keep working that problem until it's very clear. So that's the first thing I think is the narrative is really important. I think it's also good to look for existing abilities or patterns that have worked in your organization that you might start from. Many organizations now invest in integration platforms or integration services, whether in the cloud or through software in your network. And those are tools that exist already that have a support model that have maybe been used and proven out. And those tools may have already solved some of the tough problems you're going to deal with around authentication or access or whatever it might be needed to achieve that integration. It's good to look at what's already succeeded to give you that starting point. There are often then multiple different ways to achieve the thing that you want to accomplish. You might want to research those options, compare alternatives, and make a really informed choice Rather than jumping to the first thing that you might see or that somebody recommends to you, I think taking the time to consider options is really important. Second, or the last one I say would be thinking about the team that you have. You might be a solo practitioner trying to accomplish this. That's great and brave of you, but if you do have a team that supports you, think about their skills and their ability to help you when you have challenges, both during the build process as well as what you need to have a maintenance plan for your solution. It needs to live on for some time. If you don't have a team that can help you take that on and make sure that it keeps running, you're going to have a hard time succeeding beyond the build phase. Those are a few, I think, useful considerations. One way we talk about these integrations is to think about our offering of ArcGIS in these 3 different tiers. We've used this diagram for a couple of years now. Thinking about the application tier, the services or logic tier, and the data or persistence tier. It's my goal to map our different integration patterns across this. A helpful way to think about that might also be kind of front-end and back-end integrations. There's no perfect analogy here, but the front-end and back-end kind of meet in the middle, and I think it's up to discussion as to whether a custom data feed is a services or data solution. It's certainly a back-end solution. That's one way to look at it. And so I'll go through some of our existing integration options using that application services data breakdown, but you might also be able to think of it as front-end and back-end. In the application or presentation tier, I mentioned already the first pattern, which is that kind of workflow steps or the cross-app linkages. So you might use things like pop-ups or your attribute definitions and related records to jump between different applications by creating a smart link that brings you to exactly that dashboard page for that specific record in a different system. Our mobile apps support the concept of deep app linking, so you can create a URL in a pop-up that brings you straight into a different application, either from ArcGIS or from a partner like Salesforce, where you can pop between those and then get right to the exact feature you want in field maps at the end of the process. And then in the current version of Serve 123, we also support client-side webhooks where the app can send a webhook out to another system when you submit a record or save that record to your inbox. Our Maps SDKs, both for the web and for native applications, support application integration through things like custom layers, where you can build a feature layer that is constructed from arbitrary JSON from an API, or files you have on disk, or different information you have on your mobile device. So the Maps SDKs support a variety of integration options to either work with data you have or systems that you have and make those requests over standard protocols. You can also build that example from earlier of a custom application that talks to both systems at once and brings everything into one interface. Another really common pattern is the use of iframes. So we can use iframes to embed configurable apps from ArcGIS into other web-based systems and vice versa. They can go both directions. That allows you to have kind of that map-based embed for a certain part of your workflow of dropping a point or finding a location while still keeping the overall UI of your other application, again, or vice versa with ArcGIS. And then we do have a great SDK for ArcGIS Pro with a really important option for this, which is the plugin data source, really designed to support integrating external data into ArcGIS that we don't already support. So if there are diverse data systems that you want to use in a Pro workflow, that SDK component provides a good option. In the services tier, our SDK for Enterprise offers 3 different patterns for this, our SOEs, SOIs, and then custom data feeds. We'll see some custom data feed examples a bit later. People use geoprocessing services, as well as the idea of feature service and organization webhooks to achieve integrations. And then our REST APIs that we expose from the services tier, things like a geocode server or a routing endpoint or feature services themselves, are also options for integration. Other systems can talk to those, make requests, work with them, and of course you can get quite complex with things like geoprocessing services at achieving parts of your workflow. And then we do publish our services using open standards to enable integration with other systems. One of the reasons we focus on our OGC support. Inside the data tier, there are some other options. One that we spend a lot of time talking about is query layers. Query layers allow you to connect to data sources that are not geodatabases. They're from some type of database that we support for that pattern, and you use those to create read-only views on that data that you can pull into Pro, use for visualization and analysis or geoprocessing, as well as publish out as map services to your ArcGIS Enterprise. ArcGIS Data Pipelines provides ways to connect to other remote sources do data engineering on those sources by combining different data sets or filtering or adding geometry to them, and push those results into feature services in your system. Many people use notebooks, and if they're comfortable with Python, you can do lots of things with Python to run integrations. By running a notebook on a schedule with our Python API and a set of libraries to connect to data source of your choosing, you can achieve ETLs or really smart data engineering processes, that same pattern. Data interoperability, and as the base of that with FME from Safe Software is another pattern that many organizations use. We also consider real-time feeds, ArcGIS Velocity and GeoVent, and then even integrations like the way that you set up your database to use linked tables or joins or triggers based on inserts. All those things can be used to achieve some of the goals of the integrations. And GeoAnalytics Engine is also a great example of working in the data tier where you can run large data analysis jobs for engineering and then save that result either into that big data system or out to a feature service in ArcGIS. I want to quickly mention a couple of resources we've added in this area in the last few months. In November or December, we updated the Architecture Center to include a number of resources around integration in our integration pillar of the well-architected framework. If you're not familiar, there's lots of great content here. I'm going to focus in on the integration pillar and talk about what we changed. This pillar provides, I think, a really useful set of approaches and ways to think about integration, many of which I just talked about, so they'll be familiar to you. But we also published 2 new categories of content in that release. First, we spent a lot of time talking about different integration methods. So many of these terms I just mentioned in my little run through of the 3 different categories. What you'll see here on a topic like custom data feeds is a description of that offering, what it offers for integration, the technical way to think about that, as well as where it can be supported or used within our foundational products of ArcGIS Online, Enterprise, Location Platform, and Pro. And then where appropriate, some best practices, recommendations, gotchas, things to be aware of across all these different patterns. And we spent a lot of time thinking about how to present this in a relatively generic way, so we can talk about data lakes and data warehouses at a high level, and still provide details about where you can or can't or cannot yet support those things in the software. So I think this is a great place to just begin to read and get familiar with. We spent a lot of time writing about how I think we see these integrations from the Esri perspective in our software, and it's a great starting point to think about those different methods of integration like I just talked about. The second area of the website is technology providers, where we published pages that talk about these specific technologies from that earlier slide that I showed. If you want to understand the different ways that ArcGIS can work today with Salesforce, here's a page that talks about that. Same thing for ServiceNow, for Snowflake, and even for more complex stories like Amazon, where we have a lot of different options there. We now have a central place to land to think about how you can work with that technology during the architecture and design phase of building either a system or an integration. And this is all live now, and I would really love your feedback on this as well. Any of these pages, if you have things you think that we should add or that are missing, they all include a feedback option at the bottom that goes straight to our team, and we're keen to hear that and keep improving it. I want to come back to that broad set of options because we kind of went through probably a few dozen at that point, different integration tools. So we have a lot of different ways to do these things. And I think part of that is because there's such a diversity of business goals people want to accomplish with an integration that we've found ways to create different options all throughout the stack. As we think about, what's the best option, there's often not a direct answer, but I think this graphic is one way to think about that. There are certain things that are certainly easier and certain things that are harder. That's subjective, of course, to your skills and, of course, the value of that to you. You might be happy to do a hard thing if it's the perfect solution for you. But in the application tier, I think things like popping between apps through different pop-ups and links is relatively straightforward. Of course, building a whole custom application is much harder, but it may be worth it to you depending on the case. In the services tier, we already have great REST API options. And you may also see value in building a data feed or an SOI to achieve a certain integration goal. And then in the data tier, I think many of these are more straightforward. There's none that are really in the hard category for me, and this is, of course, subjective, but there's tools that are more UI-driven, like data pipelines, tools that already have really good interfaces that are well understood, that are going to be familiar to you, like a query layer definition view. And then something in the middle, like a notebook or Python script, really because it's totally up to you what you build there, and it can be easier or harder depending on how big your goals are. So maybe this is helpful to think about, the level of effort involved, whether it's the right fit or the right answer for you, really is part of a design process or a consultative discussion with your team or with a team like ours. Excuse me. We're going to make sure to move into some integration examples and demonstrations. That's kind of the mental model piece of the presentation, if you will, how to think about integrations, what all the different options are, maybe some ideas around how to approach those. I want to go through a few slide-based examples and then have some demonstrations from Jhonatan of some really interesting actual examples. The first one is a look at an integration that involves merging data to achieve a GIS-centric workflow. So in this example, we've got a system on the right in Snowflake where another business process manages our appraisals for properties. Maybe I'm a county property management office. We can use a tool like data pipelines that supports direct read from Snowflake to pull in data from those tables or those summary views and push that into our enterprise database through a feature service. I can then combine that data and update our parcels layer, which is published back to my enterprise, and I have apps at the top tier that are looking at that data, and they're able to just see the right data source at the right time. A combination of geospatially managed data and Snowflake managed information that's kept in sync through regular ETL, through data pipelines, but achieves that goal of giving people that one view in the geocentric application. That's an example, of course, that's quite straightforward, but is a valuable integration. This is a successful integration if it meets the goals that you have. Second example, looking at ServiceNow, introduces the idea of a services tier integration with a custom data feed. Again, we have a geocentric app that's been configured. You may be displaying information that is stored in your geospatial system, like let's say your data center locations or buildings that you manage as an organization. You may then have other data that you manage around your server racks and IT facilities in ServiceNow. That's great, you manage it there, it lives there, that's the system of record for that data. ServiceNow provides, of course, a robust REST API that's available to use that. Their own system uses that REST API. In this case, we can look at building a custom data feed for this case that runs as part of ArcGIS Enterprise, reads data live from ServiceNow, and presents a feature service of those results. To the application, it looks no different, and to your users, it doesn't look any different either. This is just a new feature service in your system, but the fact that it reads directly from ServiceNow live and lets you put that data into the same application is a very different pattern than a regular ETL, or a different pattern than not being able to see that information at all. So that's another example of an integration where you're able to combine different methods, and in this case, the custom data feed, a more developer or coding-centric approach to that. The last example with Salesforce is one I kind of mentioned earlier. Let's use the example of a water application or permitting application review process. We work with a number of partners that build these patterns in Salesforce. Salesforce offers a lot of great user experience-focused tools to create smart forms and manage public access. And some organizations just already have that preference or want to use that as their way to work with the public. Salesforce offers a programming environment called Apex that lets you embed iframes. It's relatively straightforward to do that. You can embed an application or get kind of more intelligent about it. In this scenario, we've built an experience builder app in ArcGIS that views feature service data or map services or image services from your enterprise database or your system. Pretty straightforward. In this scenario, I think what's interesting is that because you're working in this environment called Apex, you actually can programmatically control the iframe to have a custom URL when you embed it that is always injecting the current permit number into Experience Builder. So let's say you have a parameter in Experience Builder that when you include that parameter, it zooms to that feature and pops a pop-up for you or does something in the application. You can use that logic of the app along with the ability to program in Salesforce to say, my application should always zoom to my feature rather than just zooming to all the features that are available. That kind of nuanced programming experience, is that really developing code or is it really just configuring it? I'll leave that up to you, but it's a way to further tighten the integration to feel more tailored and more perfect for the use case that user needs. Those three examples, kind of the application level with embedding, the custom data feed level, and the idea of an ETL or data level integration are, I think, exemplary of the diversity of options that are out there with business systems based on these technologies. going to switch to Jhonatan now.
Thank you. All right, well, I had some slides, but I think I'm gonna flip the order. I'm gonna start with the demo, and then I'm just gonna show you what you saw in the demo through the slides. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you some examples of integrations. I'm gonna show you specifically 5 examples of integrating with different systems. The first one is integrating with the Snowflake to what we call query layers. So as San mentioned, query layers are pretty powerful. And you can see here I am in ArcGIS Pro. I created a connection to a Snowflake. This is what I will call a smart connection because very quickly you can see what tables are spatial. So this connector recognizes if that table has a geometry type, it flags that specific table as a table with geometry types. And then you can see also the flat tables. Now, there are 2 things I can do here. One is bad practice, which is I'm gonna right-click here and add the whole table into the map. That would be terrible, right? Nobody wants to see 100 million points on a map. A smarter way to connect here would be using query layers. So for example, here, I am creating this query to that same table. But what I am doing is 2 things. First, I am creating a geometry type. So I'm reading a flat table and using the st make point function at the data warehouse level to create a geometry type and then pulling that table or pulling the output of that into ArcGIS Pro. So in other words, I am executing or I am pushing the compute to the data warehouse, and then the output of that execution is being pulled through ArcGIS Pro via this query layer. So if I run this guy, and I zoom here, you can see that also I narrow down the output to redlands. Pretty straightforward. Now I have my points for only redlands, and that geometry was generated on the fly. Now, what if I wanna have a visualization, a national view of all this data, right? So what you can do here is, let me just zoom to the national view. You can aggregate that information, and here I am using a different function. This is the H3 xbinning function in Snowflake. So I am aggregating those points using that function, and then I am summarizing specific values that my users want to see. This is insurance data, so I want to aggregate that total insured value. And then when I push this query, I have a national view of that specific table. Again, so what I am doing is I am pushing that compute to the data warehouse, pulling the data, pretty straightforward. Now, one thing that is very interesting is the fact that you guys can create also these views at the data warehouse level. So here, for example, if I jump into Snowflake, I'm gonna create a view using the same function. This is the H3 xbinning function in Snowflake. And then when I create my query layer, let me show you, I'm reading that view directly. The advantage of that is that once that view is created and you pull that into ArcGIS, you just can right-click, share this as a web layer, and you can register that into ArcGIS Enterprise. And then, of course, you can create an application like this one here, where you are reading that live view from a Snowflake, and you can do, you can enrich this with other layers, for example, the FEMA risk index. Now you have the risk score. I can filter this by different scores. I can filter this by the total insured value. Now I have my key areas. So again, if somebody updates the raw table, the point layer, the policy table, the view is going to be updated, the service is going to be updated, the dashboard is going to be updated. So I don't have to automate any of this, right? So those are things that you guys can do with query layers. We support query layers for the Snowflake and Google BigQuery. So that's pretty interesting use cases there. Go ahead.
Just to add one comment, I think one cool thing about query layers is that it gives you a way to work really effectively with the people that already work in Snowflake.
Yeah.
Because they're able to do development, run their own analytics, build views, try out different things. And really, you should be doing that in Snowflake. You shouldn't be trying out 10 versions of your SQL query in the query layer view. Once they've defined what the analysis is, they've narrowed down the columns, they've done the summarization, they give you as the geospatial professional the summary view of that. You're then able to do all of your work, which is visualization and building the app interface. And so if you have people in your organization that are really comfortable or only really want to work in these environments like Snowflake, this is a great way to partner with them to get something done together.
Yeah. No, that's a good comment. And also, just building on top of that, another way that you can partner with these Snowflake users is through the concept of UDFs. So these user-defined functions that can be created in any of these environments. If they are using Snowflake or Databricks or BigQuery, any of these data warehousing solutions will allow you to create these UDFs. So in this example now, what I am doing is I'm creating a UDFs that will allow my SQL users to geocode.
You're writing Python in a database.
I'm,
Is that right?
yes,
Okay,
I'm running Python and SQL to create these UDFs. So the way it works is, let me just zoom here. I'm just here creating some external access rules. I'm telling basically Snowflake, hey, I want you to open, to whitelist my ArcGIS Enterprise so you can consume the geocoding service from ArcGIS Enterprise. And then you can see the original table. I don't have latitude and longitude. I have only addresses. And then here is where I use Python to create these functions, this UDF that is going to tap into the geocoding endpoint and then basically create the function. So now with that function, any SQL user is able to basically run geocoding. So if I run this, let me just start here. I forgot to create this rule here. Let's do it one by one. You can see that it doesn't have latitude and longitude here. All right, let's define the user-defined function here. It's running. And now I'm going to execute that one. So now it's basically geocoding is tapping into my enterprise geocoding endpoint. It can be using PAS. It can be using your ArcGIS location API key. And there you go. And then I'm going to merge that into my original table. There you go. And now if I run the select from for that specific layer, now you will see that I have my latitude and longitude. Right? So it executed the geocoding. And as you can imagine, you can create these UDFs for routing or for different other services that you would like to bring into these environments, right? So you are bringing ArcGIS functions to support these workflows inside of these environments. All right, so far we are covering two, right? Query layers and UDFs. Now the third one is GeoAnalytics Engine. So here, for example, what I am doing is I am in Databricks, and I am dealing with two, I would call them big data sets. I have the Overture building data set. So I have more than 179 million buildings. And then I have a data set that is coming from NOAA. These are NOAA observations for wind speed. So I have 21 million rows in that data set. And what I want to do is I want to calculate wind susceptibility. And to do that, I'm going to use GeoAnalytics Engine. So I am not going to go into details. There were many sessions about GeoAnalytics Engine, but the point here is we are running a massive calculation, a special calculations inside of these environments, these Spark environments, in this case, Databricks. So once I run this, I can push this, I can ETL this into Enterprise. I have my ArcGIS dashboard here. I have all my observations, my NOAA observations here. This is the layer. I have my wind susceptibility layer now. I basically took those buildings, aggregate them, crunch the data, create this layer. And now based on the observations and the susceptibility, I can identify those risk areas. Everything run in Databricks, and then the outputs can be pushed into ArcGIS Enterprise.
And that output's pushed directly from GeoAnalytics Engine, right?
Yes.
So you're able to publish data out, either save it into that system for reuse, or publish it out as a feature service to your enterprise or online.
Yes,
Yep.
directly. At this point, this is basically pushing from Databricks into ArcGIS Enterprise, but it's not a direct connection, right? You are doing ETL with this goal layer. So obviously, when we talk about ETL, we are never going to talk about ETL in the raw data set. That will definitely impact the performance of your applications. But many of these data warehouses have implemented this medallion architecture where you have the raw data, the enriched silver data, and then the end products, right? That gold layer that sometimes, or most times, is very manageable for ETLing. So that's what we are doing here. Now, what about if we have a bidirectional connection, right? Like a use case when the user says, hey, what if I want my ArcGIS Pro user to be able to edit this NOAA station layer? So now we are talking about not only executing analysis in Databricks and pushing that into Pro, but also editing in Pro and pushing that into Databricks. So there is bidirectionality there. And that is the perfect use case for custom data feeds. So here I have, again, ArcGIS Pro. And then I'm going to tap into the next map. And if I go to my ArcGIS Enterprise, my server, you can see that I have this feature service, this NOAA Stations feature service that is being displayed on the map. This is a feature service that was created based on a custom data feed. So basically the process of creating your custom provider, you create your custom data feed package, you deploy that into ArcGIS Enterprise, and then you can run a feature service that is reading a direct connection into the table in Databricks. So for example, if I want to edit this layer, I'm going to go to Edit. I'm going to create a new point, you see here. And just to prove that this works, I'm going to put a point on the ocean, so it's very clear that it's a new point. So it's creating the feature service. I'm going to save this. And then I have another rich application, ArcGIS JavaScript application here. And you saw how the point just popped up. Right?
Let's pause on that for a second.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. I think one fair question is, query layers and custom data feeds sound kind of similar. And I think they are similar at some level, but there's some important things that Jhonatan just showed that are different. First of all, it supports any provider that you can think up and write code to support, right? Yeah. So this provider was written with some existing libraries for Databricks, existing templates we have for custom data feeds and deployed, and it could read from any table in Databricks that you have access to as that user that's in the custom data feed. Mm-hmm. Also, in the last release, we added support for read-write in a custom data feed.
Yeah.
So not only reading, which query layers can support, query layers have never really focused on writing workflows because there's a lot of complicated questions in how that should work.
Yeah.
And you don't have access to control the SQL when you send the edit back in. You just have to rely on the system to do it. In a custom data feed, you can write the logic to be whatever you want. So you receive an edit for a point, and you can tell the custom data feed how to push that back into Databricks in the way that you want it to, and know that it's only going to behave in that manner. And so that's a key differentiator here that, as you saw, is not only real time, but allows you to work in new ways than you could before.
Yeah, well said. So 4 different ways so far, right? So we have query layers, we have UDFs, we have GeoAnalytics Engine, and now we have custom data feeds. The last one is very relevant nowadays and is integrating with these agentic environments that are becoming more and more popular, right? So there are different agentic environments out there. You have Azure Foundry, you have Sage World, you have all kinds of environments nowadays that allow you to create these agents. And there are different ways how you can integrate with these agents, right? One of those is by allowing those agents to tap into your REST endpoints, your geocoding, routing, and so on and so forth. This process becomes easier if you have an MCP server that allow the agent to understand clearly how to use these tools. And also there are these orchestration of agents that you can implement and create this agent-to-agent communication. So here, for example, what you are seeing is Copilot Studio, and I am not going to demo just the classic conversation with location. You have seen many demos of that. What I want to show you, though, is that many of these solutions to create agents allow you to share those agents via different channels. So here, for example, if I go to channels, you will see that you can embed the agent either in a web application, or you can even embed the agent or create a connection of this agent to any messaging application. Probably many of you have seen those videos on YouTube or on LinkedIn about OpenCloud and how you can basically chat with an agent using WhatsApp. That's a similar concept, but in a secure environment, right? Using an enterprise-grade agent builder like Copilot. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to select Web App, and you can see that it creates the iframe that you can use to embed that into an application, but also gives you a connection stream. So what I did is I took this and I embedded that into an application. So this is an ArcGIS JavaScript application. Let me refresh just so I make sure that the connection is live. There you go. So now if I type hello, there you go. It tells you, hey, I am your ArcGIS location agent. What do you want me to do? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this address. This is the convention center. Pass this guy here. So what the agent is going to do is, of course, it's going to tap into the geocoding endpoint from my location services, and it's going to geocode that point into the map. Now, let's say I have a headache. I was preparing myself for this presentation. I got stressed. I need to go to the pharmacy. I get some Excedrin. So I'm going to type here pharmacy. Now it's going to tap into a different endpoint. This case is the places endpoint. So again, it gives me a list of places. None of these things are stored anywhere. It's just tapping into those services, right? I'm bringing those results from those endpoints through the agent, and I'm just having a conversation with the agent. Let's say I like CVS. I like those massive receipts that you get, those very long receipts. And so I want one of those. I like paper. So I'm going to type port. And it creates the route to this closest CVS. And let's say I want to know more about that specific area. I'm not sure if it's a safe area. So I'm going to type yes here. And it's going to use now the enrichment endpoint. So that's basically what you guys can do nowadays using this channels mechanism, right? Embedding these agents in other applications, and again, integrating these agents using ArcGIS agents, location services endpoints with these other agentic platforms that you can see here. The last thing I want to show you is, go ahead.
Just 2 comments on this app. I think this is so cool. I think what it adds from just the chat experience, you can imagine using this agent, as we talked about, by itself or in Copilot, the desktop app. It adds context, and so the fact that you were in this location on the map is as an input to the agent, so it's to search for things nearby. And it is a little bit autonomous. Like, it added that layer of blue and green locations there. Without you saying, I want to add this layer to the map, please. Mm-hmm. It's able to reason and make some choices and work with the app in that way. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really different experience to think about a map connected to the chat experience, as it brings that context, and as well as enables it to make map choices for you. Really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, just to finish with the demo, and just because it's very, very trendy nowadays, let me show you how you can integrate this with an application. This is a messaging application, Telegram. So same experience. The point here is it's using the same agent. So once you create this integration between the Copilot agent, or again, the Amazon Search Word agent with the ArcGIS agent, then you can serve that integration through many channels, right? So this is just another channel. It's going to be a similar experience. So here, if I type my address, or the address of the convention center, same thing. It's going to tap into the same logic that is built in that agent, and it's going to geocode this. It gives me the geocoding. Let's say that now what I am looking for is coffee shops. So coffee shop, there you go. And if you notice, it gives me the list of the coffee shops, but also it gives me the URL. If I click in the URL, it generates the map for me to see what are these top 5 closest coffee shops in the area. Again, that's possible because we are embedding the same agent. It's just a different mechanism on how you are going to access that agent. Okay, so that is the demo piece. Let me just go back here to highlight what you just saw. So in this demo, what you saw is 5 main integrations, right? So we mainly focus on these 2 platforms today. Of course, this can apply to multiple other platforms. There are so many, time is not enough to go through all of them. But first, I really want to encourage you and challenge you to explore query layers. It's a pretty powerful concept. It really can, when you use it properly, it really can optimize the workflows and visualizations you create when interacting with these platforms. The second one, UDFs. This is really allowing these non-GIS users to interact with our technology. Right? These people that only use SQL, they don't know anything about GIS. You can make it simple for them to access your geocoding or your routing endpoints in your ArcGIS enterprise using those UDFs. Third, GeoAnalytics Engine. Pretty powerful. You can crunch massive data sets. It's the ArcGIS engine running inside of those environments. There are many sessions about this. And then custom data feeds. When you have a bi-directional connection, when you want to allow GIS users to interact with these data platforms, this is a very good solution that you can implement. And then once you perform all of those analyses and you edit, as Sam mentioned, you have to make a choice. You can either write that back into these data warehouses or lake houses, and then you would like to create a visualization, and that visualization can be chart-centric, and we have integrations for those chart-centric visualizations like the ArcGIS for Power BI. The map is helping with the workflow, but the map is not the main character, the main element. But also, there are going to be workflows that by nature are going to be map-centric, right? And that is when you have this rich platform for low-code, no-code builders that you are very familiar with, but also the ArcGIS SDK or JavaScript SDK to create these rich experiences that can integrate all of these endpoints. And it's the same with these agentic platforms, right? You can enrich those agentic platforms using our ArcGIS REST API, our agents in ArcGIS with GenAI Toolkit, and now it's coming the MCP server, so soon you're going to be able to expose some of those services using MCP, so agents are going to understand them better. And with that, I think that's all what I have to show today.
Yeah, sorry, I had to cough a little bit there. One more brief thing, which is here. A few more considerations just to think about, I think, across all these different topics that I wanted to share. One is that I think it's okay to say that this is a difficult area. You know, you need to move carefully, think about what your intention is, and not jump too quickly into a solution when you don't know some of the implications of that. There are some important things to consider that can be difficult if you don't think about them early enough. Things like identity, how you authenticate, how you use an API key, what are the rules around that, what are the limitations around that are all important. You know, our different deployment patterns between online, enterprise, Kubernetes, location platform, they each have their own implications as well. And those other systems do as well. So those systems have their own intricacies. They may have their own limitations or API tools that you use, different guidelines, different data classifications. You know, you may be familiar with the GIS system, but think about what else might be limiting you in the other business system that you talk to. And then think about things like expectations around SLAs or other kind of NFRs or requirements that may limit what you're able to do in the integration or limit the impact of that in the end. Those considerations, I think, apply to everything we talked about and are good things to think about throughout your design process. And I'll close just in saying that, you know, obviously there's a lot to go through here. We would spend many hours with other options, but we do want to share, get your feedback on what is useful or interesting from this, and take a few moments for questions here at the end as we go through. Jhonatan and I work in this space every day, and there's a lot of interest from Esri in learning more about the needs you have in the integration space and what tools work for you and what else we could provide as samples or excuse me, or guidance to help with that. So, a few minutes for questions. If you have any, raise your hand, shout it out. I'll repeat it back to the audience, and happy to take a few before the hour here. Go ahead.
You talked about Salesforce and Experience Builder, and I want to ask about the authentication in Experience Builder in this case, because you talked about frame and how you push the user frame and how you log into ArcGIS Enterprise or ArcGIS Online.
Yeah, the question was, I'll repeat it, was about the example with Salesforce and the Experience Builder app, basically how authentication and single sign-on works across that, how to keep user identity handled. Having spent a lot of time on that myself, it is quite difficult, as you have probably experienced. The couple things that I can say at a more generic level are, of course, we want to use the same single sign-on provider for both Enterprise and Salesforce. So make sure you're using the same Enterprise login option that the environment's expecting and that works smoothly in that way. Iframes have some key challenges, and we talk about that quite a bit in the page about iframes. I'll pull that up here. Excuse me, so you can see it. Here, under embedding ArcGIS apps, there's some really important considerations and best practices here. Number one being single sign-on is complicated. Okay, it's really, really complicated because, to be quite honest, browsers and the internet make it difficult, right? Iframes are a common vector for attacks and were for many years. So the browsers make it really difficult to do authentication in iframes. And so there are various ways to approach doing that. I give some examples here. And we've been successful through, I think, very creative approaches at finding ways to do that with Salesforce. But unfortunately, that remains one of the limitations in integrating between two different business systems in that iframe pattern. That's a case where I think building directly in Salesforce or embedding apps there directly, or vice versa, might gain some preference in your scenario, right? A custom data feed that allows you to do that all within ArcGIS avoids that problem entirely. I don't have a single answer for you, but I would just say that is a difficult area, and there's some good recommendations here. Other questions? Anybody? Don't think so. Happy to take any afterwards as well. I'm also happy to share the slides if you're interested in them. Feel free to drop off a business card up front with me, and I'll email them out at some point between 0 and 100 hours from today. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.